The sharp scent of fresh-cut hay and damp earth was usually my morning alarm, a grounding perfume I cherished, but this Tuesday, it was violently drowned out by the shrill, unnatural squawk of a woman I barely knew. She was standing right at the edge of my property line, hands planted firmly on the hips of her pristine, overpriced athleisure wear, yelling about the perfectly normal, happy sounds made by my two heritage Kyun pigs, Jasper and Mabel. "Are you serious right now?" I remember muttering, the words tasting like copper on my tongue. "You actually called the police on pigs?" That was the moment I knew Brenda, the newly arrived queen of the Willow Creek Estates McMansions, was about to fully unleash her inner Karen. I sighed a deep, theatrical sigh that smelled faintly of coffee and resentment, running a hand through my already messy hair. Brenda had only moved into the sprawling, beige monument next door, which backed directly onto my small, 7-acre homestead 3 months ago, and she'd been a continuous, low-grade fever in my peaceful life ever since. First, it was the rustic aesthetic of my antique Ford tractor. Then, the smell of my composting pile, which, let's be real, smelled better than her synthetic air fresheners. Now it was Jasper and Mabel, who were currently indulging in their favorite post-breakfast activity, rooting happily in a giant, glorious wallow of mud. Their oinks weren't sharp or loud. They were gentle, rumbling sounds, like distant, contented motorboats. They were happy sounds. How could anyone object to that kind of pure joy? Brenda pulled out her phone, dramatically clicking something before shoving it back into her yoga pants pocket. "It's animal cruelty and a public nuisance," she declared, her voice tight and manicured, cutting through the warm morning air like broken glass. "They are filthy, they are loud, and they are disturbing the aesthetic peace of our neighborhood." I felt a sudden, hot flush of pure, frustrated anger surge through my chest. The utter audacity. I had spent the last 5 years building this little piece of sustainable paradise, following every county ordinance, ensuring the pigs had a perfect life, and she was here talking about aesthetic peace. I wanted to scream, but instead, I gripped the wooden rail of the fence and forced a calm that felt utterly alien. "Ma'am, those are Kyun pigs. They are a grazing breed, and they require wallowing to regulate their body temperature and protect their skin. The mud isn't filth. It's sunscreen and moisturizer. It's necessary care." She just pursed her lips, which were painted a violent, unforgiving shade of pink. "Tell it to the officer, dear. He'll be here any minute." My heart sank just a little, not because I was worried I knew I was compliant, but because this was such a waste of emergency resources. A siren wailed in the distance, a sound that always makes you feel exposed, no matter how innocent you are. Soon, a clean, white patrol cruiser pulled up, slowing down near Brenda's immaculate landscaping. Out stepped a young, incredibly tired-looking officer, maybe early 30s, with the name Miller stitched on his uniform. Officer Miller approached the fence line, pausing briefly to stare at Jasper, who had rolled over onto his back in the mud, exposing his big, wrinkly belly to the sun in a display of ultimate contentment. The officer's lips twitched slightly. He gave a weary nod. "Morning, folks. We received a complaint about excessive animal noise and unsuitable living conditions. I'm guessing that pertains to these two gentlemen." He gestured toward the pigs. Brenda stepped forward, radiating the energy of someone about to receive a reward. "Officer?" she began, her tone instantly saccharine and dripping with fake concern. "These poor animals are kept in a literal swamp. The noise is unbearable all day. It's cruel. They need to be relocated to a proper facility or removed." I watched her, steam building in my ears. I wanted to point out that her dog, a tiny, shivering purebred Maltese named Princess, spent 18 hours a day trapped in a 6x6 pen on a concrete slab without a drop of shade. But I held my peace. Wait for the twist, I told myself. Wait for the clapback. Officer Miller, bless his heart, pulled out a small notepad. He looked from Brenda, to me, to the pigs, who responded to the silence by letting out a few more happy snuffles and contented sighs as they squished deeper into the cool, dark earth. He walked closer to my fence, peered at their spacious pen, their clean, dry shelter, and the troughs full of organic veggies I had grown. He leaned down slightly, then straightened up, and I swear, I heard a small, stifled chuckle escape his throat. "Ma'am, I need to verify the breed and typical husbandry practices here," he said, turning back to Brenda, his expression now perfectly neutral. He pulled out his radio, spoke into it briefly, and then waited. The silence was palpable, broken only by the rhythmic, wet slop-slop of Jasper chewing a carrot. Brenda smiled smugly, clearly convinced the animals were about to be seized. The officer waited for a return call, then put the radio away. "Well," he said, the word hanging in the air. "It appears these pigs are not, in fact, distressed. They are cune, and their condition, including the mud wallow, is standard and necessary for their health. There is no noise ordinance violation here. Pigs often make less noise than a suburban dog." Brenda's face crumpled. "Wait, what? Are you siding with her? I have a right to peace," she wailed, her voice rising to that familiar, panicked pitch. Officer Miller, however, was no longer looking at the pigs. His gaze drifted past my property line, landing squarely on the neighboring McMansion. On Brenda's patio, right next to a sign that read "Private Property, Beware of Dog," was Princess, the tiny Maltese. It was nearing noon, the sun was high and brutal, and the little dog was panting heavily, chained to a decorative trellis with no water bowl visible and no shade except for the shadow of the trellis itself. The officer's professional demeanor hardened instantly. He walked past me, past a sputtering Brenda, and straight onto her property, heading toward the dog. "Ma'am," Officer Miller said, his voice now crisp and devoid of all humor. "While I found no issues with her animals, I do have a serious concern regarding yours." I watched, mouth agape, as he pulled out his citation book, the sound of the paper tearing audible even over the light breeze. He wrote the ticket for several minutes while Brenda alternately tried to argue, cry, and threaten a lawsuit. The final charge, I learned later, was an immediate citation for failure to provide adequate shelter and water, which falls under local animal cruelty statutes. The contrast was devastating. Jasper and Mabel were rolling in glorious, temperature-regulating mud, perfectly cared for, while the expensive lapdog was suffering from neglect right next door. Brenda stood there, a look of shocked disbelief freezing her features, holding a pink slip that contained a hefty fine and a mandatory welfare check from Animal Control. The officer tipped his cap, gave me a slight, knowing wink, and then drove away. I turned and looked at my beloved cune pigs. Jasper gave a slow, deep grunt that sounded suspiciously like a satisfied laugh. Sometimes life is messy. Sometimes it's loud. But when you are committed to doing things the right way with genuine care and respect, you don't have to fear the scrutiny of those who try to police nature and common sense. The purest snort of justice often comes from the most unexpected places. If you truly nurture your own garden, karma will make sure the weeds next door get exactly what they deserve.